Right, this is Harvey's A65 Spitfire. It's March 2021 and we're starting to put this together. It's all been cleaned, it's all been machined. This is just really careful reassembly. First job is a crank. The oil tube in here is refitted, everything's clean. The blank on the end here, the plug on the end, has been screwed in until it's flush with heavy duty Loctite, and it's been dinked around the edges. Process now is to check for end float. So reassembling with the original mains in place, dropping it into the cases. I have to say the main bearing is a loose fit on the crank, and it will need to go together with some bearing seal, I think. Now we place the other one on top. Right, that's together. Going to tighten that up now and set up a dial gauge to see what it looks like for end float. Quill runs vertically. We'll zero it out and then we'll see if we can get some end float on this. End float, which is too much. It should be less than 3, more than 1.5. So that's, I'm looking at that with no parallax, don't know if the camera is. That's 0 to 16. So we measured the end float, no shims, 16th thou. Off she comes. Crank out, bearing out, shim behind it. Crank out. Right, the answer is that this is the shim, and it fits just there very nicely. So that's how we'll put it back together again then. It's the right thickness and it fits like a glove. Main bearing. This now has the bronze thrust washer fitted, held in place with just a little bearing seal. Keep it all together while we put it together again. That's together. I'll tighten the cases up and then get a dial gauge on it. Checking the end float from the bottom, lifting it on a lever. So the crank's primed through the timing side feed. You can see oil coming out the big ends. We now have the left-hand rod, so this crank is oriented as though it were in the bike. That's the timing side, that's the drive side. The left-hand drive side rod has a tiny hole drilled in it which should face the flywheel, and that's how we're going to fit it now. Seated nicely in the rod, leaving room to put these two crimp nuts on, and they will be torqued. And I think the torque setting is 25 pounds, but we'll check that before we do it. So here's the second rod. These have been assembled hand tight, I would expect, slightly more than hand tight. They've been assembled by the guy who polished the rods. So the rods and their end caps are polished together. These are new nuts on the previous bolts because the engine had done only a few hundred miles before it was torn down again for a poor oil supply. So Harvey reckons the rods and the bolts will be fine. We put new nuts on for the sake of the crimp. Right, so that's the rod with its markings where it's supposed to be. We need now to insert the new big end shells. Big end shells are here. This is the right hand rod with no oiled way. The reason for the oil way on one side only is that the right hand side of the crank and the bottom of the pistons is oiled by surplus oil from the timing side bearing. So there we are with the shell mounted in the top half of the rod. We now need to put a shell in the bottom half of the rod, winding up the tag, snapping it into place. Then we put it together. We can see where the markings were, 239, 239, so that's the way it goes together. That is now on with the brand new nuts, and we'll tighten those up hand tight, and that's the rough assembly of the bottom end done. I believe the setting is 25 foot-pounds. We'll check that before we do it. Those are now hand tight, and you can see that they are very nice, sliding fit. There's a little side to side movement on each rod, which is normal. No sign of up and down. No sign of up and down on either rod, that's perfect. So check the manual. The torque setting for the conrod bolts is 22 foot-pounds. So here we are set to 20 foot-pounds to do the initial torquing, and then we'll take it at 22 in a minute. It's 20. That's 20. 20. 20. Still looking good. Right, we'll reset the torque wrench. Last 2 pounds. 22. 22. 22. 22. The roller main bearing on the drive side is a loose fit on the journal. There's no play, but it does offer it the opportunity to spin on the journal. We want something to happen here, so we will fit this with some bearing seal. So we're going to clean up this joint squeaky clean, and this surface, apply the bearing seal, let it sit down, tap it to make sure it's absolutely sure it's home, and then we'll leave it to set and do the assembly shortly afterwards. So this is Loctite 638. It's retaining compound, not thread lock. This is the predictable solvent. So that's now oil free. So the Loctite, going to apply here. So this is green and it's ever so slightly viscous, and it will ensure that this bearing is a tight fit on the journal. Pretty sure that's down, but we will give it a tiny tap just to be sure. Right, it's one crankcase half, nice and clean. Going to oil up that just to be on the safe side. Pick up the crank and put that secured bearing where it belongs, looking after the rods as we do it. Which means, there we go. And that clunk means that everything has gone absolutely where it's supposed to be. So next is to fit the cam. This cam has no numbers on it, but I don't know if you can see, it's got a fairly impressive aggressive profile there. Slightly blued on a couple of lobes, but certainly no damage. We'll oil the hole up and we'll fit the components that address the timed breathing of the A10 engine. It's only when those holes match those holes that the air can breathe out from under the pistons on the downstroke. Perfect. Next step is to put the cases together after we've applied the goo to here. That's better. Perfect. Perfect.